So we're going to talk a bit about the financial services landscape and SMSF world. I want to just start by talking quickly about why we're talking about it and why it's important. Then Grant's going to talk to you about what's driving it. And then I'm hopefully going to come back and talk to you a little bit about what it might mean for your funds. So when you leave this room, what might you want to think about? This is my disclaimer, which says you shouldn't act on anything that I say, which, given that I'm from AustralianSuper, I don't expect you to anyway. So why are we here? The reason this topic strikes me as a really important one came out in about 3 examples just very recently. One of my colleagues was on Curtis Island, and a very traditional, strong union member said to my colleague, "I'm on a good wicket now, I think I should start an SMSF." I was in Ballarat and a group of employers said, "We don't believe in the superannuation market anymore, we don't believe in funds management anymore, we want to buy property. I think I'll set up an SMSF." And a group of workers from a non-English speaking background came up to us and said, "I've heard if I buy a house and my friend buys a house, we can live in each other's houses, pay rent and end up with a property. I want to start an SMSF." All 3 of those are pretty telling, and they're from from very traditional groups. The 4th was the most disturbing, was a member of an investment team of one of the most prominent industry funds in the country approached me and said, "I want to start an SMSF." Now, quite apart from the trauma that represents when you're actually investing money for people and deciding to put your money somewhere else, it really struck me that this is a all-pervasive kind of a proposition, and I think it's important that we address it, even if we are the last session before the bus, before the plane, before you get home. This is how I characterise the climate that superannuation's in, and each of you will have your own clamp. Now, most of the people in this room are investment orientated and spend more time thinking about the return side and the net return side, less costs, but you'll all be fully aware of the sort of pressure all of us are under. Competitive pressure, compliance pressure, rising member expectations, stakeholder pressure, host of pressures, all of those rising against a diminishing base of resources in some instances. So this issue of SMSF arising is really important, especially against this background of what I describe as this climate. And I think this climate is true for retail funds, as it is for industry funds, as it is for large funds, as it is for small funds. I think we're all experiencing and trying to work out how to manage all of these competing pressures. You might say, as I heard in the first session, well, that sort of stuff's the CEO's job, just give us the money and let us concentrate on that. My point is that this is actually all about the money, and it's only about the money. Because if you don't think about your inflows and if you don't think about your net cash flow position, everyone's job in this room is fundamentally made much more difficult, to the point of eventually not being able to be done. So I think sometimes when we have these discussions about SMSF, we say, oh, we'll give that to the marketing guy. Or you think about, how's the fund going overall? We'll give it to some BD person, or we'll get our account managers to think about it, or we'll get our advertising agency in to do it and what have you. But I want to stress to you that the issue of where people are choosing to put their money is fundamental to your ability to make asset allocation decisions, fundamental to rebalance your portfolios, fundamental to your ability to invest over the horizon in asset classes like infrastructure. So if you're sitting in this room, I want to start this discussion by saying this topic is really important because it's being talked about. This topic is really important because all of our funds are under pressure. And this topic is important because it's about investing. And unless you know where the money's coming from and what's likely to come in over the future, you won't be investing to achieve that best possible net return that you're all in pursuit of. I'm going to hand to Grant now. He's going to talk to you about this SMSF phenomena.
How are we all? Thank you for waiting around and looking at me, and not a bad character actually, so at the end of the day. Look, it's tough. My start with superannuation was around about 26 years ago when I was working at KPMG. One of my first ever clients was AustralianSuper, and still around in those days, and many of you probably aware and obviously have been around for a while. In those days it was mainly defined benefit funds, and then the big shift moved to the defined contribution funds, and that really created this whole industry. The SGC system has probably been the best thing for our industry ever. And I remember way back in 91, 92, when we were in our last recession, and I don't think any of us should think otherwise, that we're not moving towards a recession, or certainly a darker stage in our economy at the moment. At that stage, when I was at KPMG, working in the tax and superannuation area, that my wages for a year, my normal CPI wage increase was foregone because my employer decided to pay my 3% into my super guarantee. And then it went up to 6 and went up to 9. One thing I always realised is that money that does go in there is my money. And it's not like a GST, it's not my employer's money, it's not money that's the government's, it's actually my money. And at the end of the day, I need to do something with that money. That money goes over time and has continued in our industry. And our industry is really, if you look at it from a post-SGC, we're still only 20 years old. But look at it for our perspective, we've garnered what is a world exclusive $1.3 trillion in superannuation. Now, self-managed super funds, we've got a good slice of that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. In fact, I'm going to give you a completely different slant on why people are inside self-managed superannuation funds. But one thing that does worry me is that and I think we need as an industry to stand up, and I don't care whether it's self-managed industry or retail, but when the government says that they're going to start to get taxes from superannuation as it is, because I can tell you, as soon as we start to change the industry too much, and it doesn't matter, it's very hard to localise on self-managed. As soon as that happens, you're going to find the accountants out there, the financial planners, who'll start putting their clients into negatively geared products. And it means all we're going to end up with is the drip feed of SGC, which is what we don't want. We want people to be interested in making extra contributions. You don't want people to say, well, I've got an extra $50,000 saved up after tax. I want to put it into super. I don't want to be seen to actually be put in negative gearing, because that has an impact on the whole of the industry, including, as we just saw, that obviously affects everyone's inflows. What I think is one of the big things now that I've noticed, and I've been doing this primarily since self-managed super funds have come around in 1994. I saw Brett Himbry. I used to work at Rothschild way back in 94 to 96, and he was a BDM manager there at that time, and they let me go out and start talking about self-managed super funds. So, we're now around about 18 years of age. But what I've noticed over the last probably 18 to 20 years is there's now 4 super generations. And that has a big impact. And I would put it to you that SMSFs have a place for certain people, but I believe that if we consider each of the generations differently, and we need to start to market to each generation differently. Like, I'm looking at the tweets up here on the screen. My mum would not know a tweet, from a sparrow, and like, she's 78 years of age. Now, this is a woman who I only just, when Dad had a stroke earlier this year, showed her how to use her first ATM card. And here's the first point I would put to you. Many in that war generation, probably the ones who are 75 plus, should not be in self-managed super funds. In fact, I believe it's incumbent upon your industry that as their balances go down, they start to lose their mental capacity, that's the time to actually sweep them out of self-managed superannuation funds and give them a really true reason of why they should be an industry fund. It takes the pressure off them. They don't need that financial pressure anymore. They just need, for many of them, they just need simply to get that income, know the income's coming in, they're going to get stable investment returns, and more importantly for a lot of them is they're going to be able to participate in some social security. And don't think that self-managed super funds are like, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of money, but I can tell you there's a lot between 500 to $1 million that looks good at age 50, but once you start drawing down in that pension phase, and now when we go to the baby boomers, once we start drawing down in that pension phase, you're going to find that it now becomes uneconomical. Their returns that they're getting, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, has really knocked the baby boom generation out. One of the good things about it is for you is that the war generation are extremely tight-fisted. They lived through the Depression, they lived through the war where there was rationing. These people do not like paying a cent. Now, they don't pay money to their accountants, they don't pay money to anyone, so I think it's a really good opportunity for you to go back, quasi, as came about with the commissions and the planners. Are you paying your accountant too much money to run your self-managed superannuation fund? Is it no longer economical? And I think there's a position there that on the drawdown phase that you can actually say this is the right time to start to make the switch. We move to the next one, and this is my generation, the baby boomers. Unfortunately, a lot of us have been hit rapidly by the GFC. There's a few baby boomers in self-managed super funds, but there's not a large amount because many of the baby boom generation have really never trusted super. They've still got their money in their industry or retail funds, but a lot of them have built up quite sizable nest eggs outside of superannuation, primarily in negatively geared property. And negatively geared property has been really a domain of the real estate agent, a domain of the mortgage broker, and also a domain of obviously the accountant. So that's been the big driving force. Baby boomers, they have a reasonable amount in super, but there's quite a lot of them. I don't really see many of them inside self-managed super funds, which many of you would be perhaps surprised about. Many of them tend to be outside. Those ones who are in superannuation, you've got a lot of them, but you would see a lot of them have been hit extremely hard over the last 4 or 5 years. Their balances have gone down. They're having to work a lot longer. In fact, I would say baby boomers are probably wearing the brunt of this change in the GFC and will continue to do so. Gen X and Gen Y, not a big drama. So the baby boomers, I would be saying, well, going back to your clients and saying, look, it's not worth switching over to self-managed superannuation funds. Generation X, I'm going to talk about these guys for a little bit last. This is probably the big super generation. And this is the generation that we really all need to be focusing in on the long term. It's the accumulators. As I said, the baby boomers, they're all about to go off into retirement land in the next 5 to 10 years. This is the generation. What I've noticed with Generation X that puts them so differently to baby boomers is, for the most part, Generation X have both husband and wife or 2 spouses working, and they've both been in the SGC system for quite a period of time. So that creates a problem for your funds in that if it's not structured properly, if the right proposition, and this is what's happening at the moment, is put to them and they become aware, and I'll talk about that in a second, but if they become aware that they can pool their superannuation with their spouse and suddenly end up with $200,000 to $300,000 or $400,000, then it becomes a very attractive strategy for them to move to a self-managed superannuation fund. And primarily it's because the Gen X, unlike the baby boomers and the war generation, the problem you've got with Gen X is they do not take advice. They will not go and see an advisor. They will not go and see a planner. They may go and see their accountant. They get all their information from their friends. They get all their information from websites. They get all their information from tweets. That's where they get all these ideas. They are happy to go to a property seminar and make the decisions themselves. And I've seen a number of Gen X people make big vast tracts of bad decisions and putting bad paperwork and time inside a self-managed superannuation fund simply because they've tried to do it themselves. It seems to me in the Gen X, it's this block mentality. Let's go and do something ourselves. Let's start to go and build that. And unfortunately at the moment, property still holds sway in this Gen X. And it's a danger, and I think that this is something that you guys need to have a look at, is that banks will now lend 80% of an LVR of whatever you're putting inside your self-managed superannuation fund. So you might say, well, we're losing clients with 50,000, but if it's husband and wife, they've got 50,000 each, and that's not even Gen X, that's Gen Y we're talking about. That's not Gen X, it's Gen Y. They can now go out and get a $400,000 apartment quite easily. And the banks themselves, all their checks, they don't do much rudimentary checking. All they do is see what SGC has come in for the last 2 to 3 years. So there's probably a bit of a problem coming down the track on that one. Gen Ys, they're different. For that, I think Gen Ys, we've all got to engage them. Inside self-managed, they're not going to come to anywhere near us for the next 10, 15 years. I believe that Gen Ys need to be engaged a lot more. One of the areas that I know is going to be talked about is why can't, if people are choosing their own direct investments inside their industry fund, so that you're allowing them to choose their stocks, why can't you have actual balances, because you'll know your investment returns from all your different investors, all your different members in the fund. Give Gen Y a game where they can put money in there, and then at the end of the year they can compare themselves to all their other Gen Y colleagues, because that's what they like. They want to feel special. That's Gen Y's aim of being. Look at engaging them in a different way, because I can tell you that at the end of the day, not many people are. This is the big thing. War generation 2.8, few of them in self-managed, not a huge amount. Baby boomers 4.8. Over the next 15 to 20 years, that's going to create, our industry is going to be paying a lot for the healthcare. It's also going to be paying a lot for the age pension, because a lot of the baby boomers are going to end up on social security. Much the same as our industry is now being asked to pay for the disability scheme, the educational scheme. At the next 15 to 20 years, once these guys get up to 65 to 70, 75 plus, you know who's going to get tapped on the shoulder? There's not much left anymore. It's going to be effectively the superannuation industry, and we've got to watch out for that. But look at the next generations, Gen X and also Gen Y. They're quite a significant amount of money, and a lot of that money is going in through SGC. I just want to go through these slides before I just talk about 4 or 5 reasons of self-managed super fund popularity. These are the accumulators. You can see there the war generation. They're really not on the block. The baby boomers are the red bar. They're dwindling down, so they're moving into that drawdown phase. You can see the white chart is Gen X and the black chart is Gen Y. I'll move on to drawdowns, and you can start to see that the baby boomers are doing quite a significant amount of drawdown over the next 15 to 20 years. The big one that blew me away when I first compiled this, and this comes from Deloitte stats in 2009, is that when you look at that, Gen X, hands down, really are the superannuation generation, not only now, but for the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. They're the people who are actually going to shape where your flows come from, how much goes to self-managed, what goes to retail. Those accumulators are sitting on the fence now. Many of them do not know, they're completely disengaged from their superannuation. They might have 2 or 3 accounts, they don't know where that money is sitting, until someone comes along and explains to them that this is where your money is, this is what you can do with your superannuation. At the end of the day, you'll have to know the Gen X, there's not going to be any age pension for you. Ask them, they already understand that. They already understand that these guys aren't going to be like my grandfather who dies at age 70. These guys are going to last to age 95 to 100. If you have a listen to the Institute of Actuaries, they've come out, and scary for the Gen Ys in here, but with medical advancements, there's no reason why Gen Y, or my children's age, will not live to age 120. So that means, a scary thought, isn't it? So like, what you're going to look like. Who wants to be alive at that one? So one of the big things that also facing our industry, and that's the longevity issue, which I'm sure all of us are looking at, is Gen X. So sorry to put it to you guys, but you're not going to be touching your super to age 65 or 70. Gen Y is probably going to be around the same thing. Preservation age and also age pension will both move together, and they'll gradually increase. We have to do that because of the longevity issue. So SMSFs, we've now got 480 to 490,000 of them. There's 3,000 being set up each quarter. They're not the baby boomers setting them up, and it's not the war generation, it's the Gen X. And most of the instances we find, and I'm the chairman of the Australian SMSF Members Association, we've just done a big survey of our members, is it's not control they don't come for control, 90% of people move to a self-managed super fund to move away from an industry or retail fund. They actually choose to move away, and that's what our survey says. So there needs to be more research, more surveys with your members to actually say, well, what do you get from us, or what do you need from us that you have to move away from us? We've got, as I said before, the Gen X. Don't worry about Gen Y, but there's a big switch from your funds to actually setting up borrowing with superannuation into property. And I think in the long run, that's not going to last anyway. So that's only probably a short-term blip. I expect it to be around for another 2 or 3 years. It's surprising when you have a look at the asset allocation of self-managed superannuation funds. If I took you back 4 or 5 years ago, pre-GFC, around probably about 40 to 45, and if you took funds in as well, 55% of all assets inside self-managed super fund were in stocks, or in Australian equities. And the scary thing about it is they're all in around about 10 stocks: Woolworths, BHP, Coles, and all that. So there's been no true asset allocation there. What's happened over time? ETFs are now becoming extremely attractive. We've also got now a position that I believe is a little bit dangerous, is that we've now got a position because of FOFA that with no commission being paid to financial planners, a lot of them are now moving and gravitating over to the self-managed super fund space where they can charge an asset-based fee. It's just the simple facts. The biggest thing that's going to be a problem for both the retail industry funds or your industry is that the government has jumped off the fence, whereas before it was always problematical whether accountants could offer advice around self-managed super funds. The government expects that between 2013 and 2016, there'll be 10,000 accountants who will now become licensed to give advice in relation to self-managed superannuation funds. So that now means where we had a small percentage of people, planners, talking about self-managed super funds, you've actually got an increasingly wide SMSF advisory pool. Basically every accountant on every corner is now going to be an SMSF advisor, because they're not going to talk about industry, they're not going to talk about retail, they'll talk about self-managed super funds. And why will they do that? Because every self-managed super fund they put on means to them at least between $1,500 to $2,000 in administration fees per annum. So I think your industry challenge is probably not so much where the GFC or where they're hitting. You actually need to watch out for the roadblocks that are coming up and start to look for the Gen Xers and put in their face an ability where they can start to make direct choices around ETFs, other investments and so on through your funds, and engage them through the Twitter, through the Facebook, all of that sort of stuff. The other one that I also challenge you to as well, the SMSF industry is extremely fragmented. No one makes a huge amount of money out of it. I can tell you that. And that's, there's no one who's actually cracked the code. What I would suggest though is it's an opportunity for you to perhaps, if you've got the opportunity, to go and buy quite a successful little administration business. It's not going to cost you that much, and offer that to your members. Offer that so that they can go into that, they feel they're in control. But again, if you have a look at it, there's a really good mechanism, a really good group in there called eSuper. eSuper charges $600 to $700 administration a year plus audit, provided you go back and use CompSec, or you go back and use this cash management deposit. All you have to do is exactly the same thing, give them a little bit of a opportunity to invest in the top 50 funds, but then getting them back to invest in your pools of funds. Start to create wholesale funds for these guys to invest in. Keep away from the property. As I said, it's not going to be long lasting. Give them the look and feel. If they want to go down that track, they'll have to pay a little bit more money, and then you can actually switch it up, but then show them how to engage. And look, don't worry about baby boomers or war generation. As I said, the big killer group for us, or our killer app, is those Gen X that are out there. That currently there's $600 billion sitting in their accounts, and at the moment they don't even know it's there. So we need to engage them and start to go through. Anyway, I'll hand back and we'll see the other side of the coin.
Thanks. So thanks, Grant. My question is this one. Are SMSFs the devil? Discuss, or in the words of Tweet, expand. Our view is that we might be jumping at the wrong shadow as an industry fund sector. That's AustralianSuper's view, that actually there's a whole lot of things that Grant's just described that make SMSFs attractive, and there's a whole host of people designed to make them look attractive as well. But I think the question is much bigger than SMSF. I think it gets to your fund strategy, and what are you going to do with your funds to make sure that your funds attract the right people, keep the right people, and are popular to the right people. The best strategy I can think of is to get people early and keep them forever. But you need to think for your own funds, what are the implications? So we spend a lot of time talking about SMSFs, and actually if you pick up the Fin Review, there's one article that boots an industry fund for every one article that pumps up the tyres of an SMSF. So when you read the Fin Review, you get the impression that they're significant, but just one interesting fact, that their rate of growth is now slower than industry fund rate of growth. Now, what's led to that, I'm not sure, but I think we should think about what our fund strategies are. First question you have to ask yourself is, does it matter? Does it matter to your fund? I don't think enough funds have been thinking about, does this matter? Are people actually leaving us to go to SMSFs, and at what rate? And what is that rate through time? So first question is, does it matter at all to your fund? We think member control does matter, and I was really interested in Grant's point that people leave to leave rather than leave for control. Our research tells us something different than that, that some people are interested in control. But to put that in context, 80-90% of people are in the default. 80 or 90% of people aren't in interest of control, and 80 or 90% of people you'll be setting default strategies for some considerable amount of time. Now that might be shifting towards control, but it starts at a very high level, and it's only shifting marginally. The question I'd like to ask, you might want to ask of Grant, and I'd like to ask of the SMSF sector is, what is it that members want to be in control of? So there's really three key things to super. There's the trustee governance. Do you want to be in control of that? There's the administration. Do you want to be in control of that? And then there's the assets insurance. Do you want to be in control of that? Our gut feeling is there are some people who want to be in charge of all of those three things, but most people are interested in the investment insurance side of things. So when people say control, exactly what are they talking about they want to be in control of? We did introduce this member direct thing, which we've done as a soft launch. It's got about $500 million in it at the moment. And for the people who engage with it, they are really interested in shares and trading shares and trading ETFs and putting term deposits sometimes in the wrong banks, Gary. But in any case, those people are really interested in that. But actually, if you look at the SMSF population, Grant, they're mostly actually invested in blue chip shares and TDs, and they hold them, and they don't really care about capital, they care about income. And so this product actually doesn't deal with the vast bulk of people who've got an SMS today. They've mostly got blue chip shares for income and term deposits. This definitely appeals to people who want to trade and play and control and go to a party on the weekend and explain how they went with one stock or another. And for us, it does open up the opportunity of the term deposits and ETFs, and people get tax at the individual level, which is really important for people. People who hold SMSFs care about their tax, their individual tax position, and particularly their CGT position. So there's charms about this product, but it doesn't actually solve the big issue, which is most people who've got an SMSF do it for blue chip shares for income and for term deposits. I think the big issue is exits. I don't think the big issue is SMSFs. There's a great question on here that says, is the success of SMSFs a barometer of industry fund failure? And it might be in some respects for some people. But I think the big question for all of us in this room to think about is exits. Are people leaving, and why are they leaving? And do you want to do something about that? Two other aspects of exits that I think we should think about too is We at AustralianSuper, we really only look at active members, those members who are getting contributions, because all those inactive members are going to be subject to two things: one, auto consolidation, and two, they're not putting any new money in. So that's a really important issue, this active versus inactive, when you think about exits. They may not leave your fund, but effectively they're not giving you any new money. Affects that original proposition about cash flow that I talked about at the start. Second question about exits is, we've seen this sneaky group, I shouldn't say sneaky, it's a delightful group of people who join the fund, because we're a members first organisation, who buy just enough of an account balance to have insurance in our fund and put the rest of their assets in somebody else's. And that's an interesting thing too. So you would put them down as a member, but they might put 10 grand in the fund and then they don't put any more money in. And again, that has a big impact for your modelling, for your cash flow modelling. So for each of you here in the investment team who's tracking cash flow, I would suggest you need to look not just at who's leaving the fund, but who's stopped contributing to the fund, because auto consolidation will get some of them and others will not be putting any money in the future other than maybe to cover their insurance premiums. And there's a whole lot of advice being given to SMSF clients, which is good logical advice for the SMSF client, to get an SMSF and then grab an account balance at a large industry fund and get good insurance and insurability through your industry fund. So when you think about exits, try and think about it on a couple of different levels. There he goes. I didn't do that, but I love it. So my question for you would be to ask yourselves these questions. If you think this is an issue at all, because clearly SMSFs have got a third of the market and they've got some charms to people. They're going to have an impact on cash flow and they may have an impact on your fund's cash flow, or they may not, but you need to ask yourself. I think it's worth at least investigating, and once you investigate whether it's important and what's happening, then you can work out what your strategy is. And I think Grant's observation about the different generations is really helpful, but I think if you don't mind me from here asking you to ask yourself this question, are exits a problem for your fund? Exits or inactivity, are they a problem for your fund? That's something only you can decide. If they are, or they might be, who is going? How old are they? What account balance have they got? Is it in one state more than another? Is it in one industry more than another? Who's going? Because it might be a restructural proposition and you can't do much about it. But who's going? When are they going? We discovered a quite disturbing aspect here is there actually is an incubation effect in our fund. 7, 10 years, reasonable balance, then you're at greater risk of going. Get over that, you stay. Come in at the start, so I'd ask you to not only ask yourself who's going, like age-wise and balance-wise, but when are they going? How long are they with you before they go? Where are they going? And beware that it doesn't look like they're going to an SMSF, because they may just be going to an SMA to set up an SMSF. But check where they're going, and you should know that. I'm sure you're all with fine administrators who could very quickly give you the answer to that question. And most importantly, why are they going? I don't think we do enough asking people why they joined and why they left. But if we knew why they were leaving, if we knew who they were, if we knew where they were going, if we knew when they were going, if we knew why they were going, then you, as part of your fund strategy, can work out, is it worth doing something about that or not? I think this question about what are they doing it for? This why, the what. If we can ask them what they're doing and where they're going, I think that's a really important thing for us to get to the bottom of. All of this, I think, is just one element of this issue about achieving people's best possible retirement outcome. We won't be able to deliver the best possible retirement outcome for people if we don't secure our cash flows, if we don't know where we're going and we don't know what our strategy is. I'm worried, and my observation is that there's a fair bit of media hype in the Fin and, of course, other places as well. There's a fair bit of discussion about this, which often pits one part of the sector against another part. But we're actually in the business of trying to deliver people's best possible retirement outcome. And we are all convinced, each of us, that people's best possible retirement outcome comes from being in our fund. And I think the challenge to us is to say, if the world's shifting, if people are talking about things we weren't expecting, if they want to interact in a way we hadn't previously expected, If they're leaving us, we should know who they are, where they're going and why they're going, and then we can work out whether we want to do something about it. Thank you.